Ordinary income is taxed based on whatever other income you have for the year. And probably for most people while they're working, you're paying federal tax 22% or higher. But when you go into retirement now, you're not going to have as much income, so you might find yourself in the 12% tax bracket. And currently right now, if you're a single or a joint filer and you find yourself in the 12% tax bracket, you pay 0% capital gains tax. How would you like to pay 0% tax on the amount of stock that you have in your 401k plan?
Are you ready for a successful retirement? We're addressing the topics facing today's retirees. Welcome to Retire with Ryan. Now here's your host, Ryan Morrissey.
Welcome back. This week we're going to talk about 4 things that you should know before you do a 401k rollover. And if you're not sure what a 401k rollover is, it's when you have a 401k plan with a former employer. And this could either be through you getting laid off or you retiring. There are a tremendous amount of advertisements out there telling you that you should roll over your old retirement plan. And many of these do not ever adequately disclose or cover the things that you should be thinking about anytime that you're considering doing a rollover. So I want to take you through those 4 things that you should consider anytime you do a rollover. And number 1 is, can you save taxes by taking advantage of an IRS distribution option known as NUA, or net unrealized appreciation? And the way that this works is that if you have stock in your 401k plan that is from your former employer, where that company is a publicly traded company. So one of the biggest employers in Connecticut is CVS. So let's just say you used to work for Aetna, but it's now CVS, and you've owned that stock for a while. You might be able to pay significantly less tax on this stock by taking advantage of this rather than just selling the stock and rolling it over as cash. And that's what many people do. They're not even aware that they can take advantage of this. And normally what happens in a rollover is that whatever you currently are invested in inside of your 401k plan is sold, and a check is then made payable to your wherever the money is going. This could be a new 401k plan, it could be an IRA. But before you do that, you want to investigate this. Now, if you don't have publicly traded stock in your 401k, then don't worry about it. But if you do, you want to pay attention. So the first thing you'd want to figure out is, what is your cost basis in the stock? And what I mean by that is, what did it cost you to acquire the shares of this stock? And by reaching out to your 401k provider, they should have record of this. And from there, then you'd want to know, what is your gain on the stock? Meaning, what is the current value of the stock versus what you paid for it? And if it's significant enough, then you might want to take advantage of this. And in order to take advantage of this, you must have a triggering event. And there's 4 triggering events. 1 is death. And obviously, you're not going to benefit from this, but if you inherit a 401k plan from a spouse that this applied to, then you might be able to take advantage of this. If you are under disability, as defined by the IRS, if you are no longer working for the company, or you've reached age 59 and a half. So let's work through an example of this. Again, I said, let's just assume you work for CVS and you bought Aetna stock long before the merger, and you paid $10,000 to buy that stock, and that stock is currently worth $100,000. So you have a $90,000 capital gain. And you have also an additional amount of money in mutual funds inside of the 401k plan of $200,000. So total 401k balance of $300,000. If you want to take advantage of this, what would happen is you'd need to do a complete rollover of the plan in the same tax year. What I mean by that is, you have to have the 401k zeroed out, no money in it by the end of the tax year. And 2 things in the rollover. 1 is that whatever was the non-stock, that money would be rolled over either to another IRA or 401k, and the stock portion would be distributed to you in shares, whether that the company mails you the certificate of the shares and you then deposit it electronically in a non-retirement brokerage account, or they transfer the shares electronically. It just depends on the company and how they do it. So in that tax year, when you do this rollover, you only have to pay tax on the basis, which in this case would be $10,000. That would be taxed as ordinary income. then the original gain is always going to be taxed at long-term gains whenever you sell the stock. If you keep holding it after you've done this rollover and you then held it for less than a year and made more money on it, then that would be taxed as a short-term gain. And then anything past a year would be taxed as a long-term gain. But where the real benefit of this is in the different rates that long-term gains are taxed versus ordinary income. Ordinary income is taxed based on whatever other income you have for the year. And probably for most people while they're working, you're paying tax at least 22%, federal tax that is, 22% or higher. But when you go into retirement now, you're not going to have as much income, so you might find yourself in the 12% tax bracket. And currently right now, if you're a single or a joint filer and you find yourself in the 12% tax bracket, you pay 0% capital gains tax. How would you like to pay 0% tax on the amount of stock that you have in your 401k plan? Well, that's where one of the real benefits is that if you can structure things and you can sell the stock over time, you might be able to pay 0% tax on it. So that would be a major savings where in my previous example, if you had that $90,000 capital gain and you otherwise would pay tax on that money at 22%, if you didn't take advantage of this net unrealized appreciation, then you'd be paying a little bit less than $20,000 to get that money out of your 401k plan. So that's real savings in this example. The more that you have in the company stock, the greater the savings could be. If you had double that amount of a capital gain, then you might be able to save $40,000. And that's assuming you can pay it at 0%. And that it is possible, but that's really going to work best if you can take advantage of this. And then very early on in your retirement, when you're not collecting Social Security, you can then sell off the stock when you don't have a lot of other income or preferably no income, then you can pay tax at that 0% rate. But if you're not able to use that 0% long-term capital gain tax rate, then the next level up from there is 15% capital gain. And that extends all the way up into the highest federal tax bracket. So even if you have to pay capital gains tax rates at 15%, if you otherwise normally would have paid tax on this money at 22%, then that's a 7% tax savings for you. And on that same $90,000 example, that would be $6,300 of savings that you would have. So this should be first on your mind if you're considering a rollover, is looking at net unrealized appreciation. You want to factor this money in as well, as I said before, to other income you have. And the other one negative of it is that this money, once it comes outside of your retirement account, it is no longer in the tax-deferred retirement account. So whatever you do with the money after that, then it will be subject to capital gains. But you should be able to structure things that you could really minimize those gains if you do it properly. Another negative you have to consider is it's never a great idea to have a lot of your money invested in one company. Even great companies can see their stock prices decline significantly, and a large decline in the stock price could really wipe out a lot of the tax savings that you're receiving by taking advantage of this. So you have to factor that in, and you probably want to move rather quickly in selling this stock once you've used this strategy so that you minimize those short-term fluctuations. One other thing with this you have to think about is if you do this when you're on Medicare, there is a additional amount you might have to pay for Medicare. It's called an IRMA, income-related monthly adjustment amount, if your income goes over a certain limit. And I would go back and listen to episode 31, which is Avoid Overpaying for Medicare in 2021 and beyond, just to understand how that works. The next thing you want to consider is whether you have a loan with your current 401k plan. And if you have an existing loan with a 401k plan, you usually want to get that loan paid off before you do a rollover. Because what happens is that if you don't pay off that loan before you do a rollover, then whatever the remaining loan balance that you have is potentially taxable to you. So let's just say you had a $100,000 401k with a $20,000 loan and you process the rollover. Then you would have $80,000 that would be rolled over, and that $20,000 would then be, you'd receive a 1099 for that. Now, it used to be that you only had 60 days to repay that loan. So that was a really short period of time. But because of the Tax Reconciliation and Jobs Act that was passed in 2017, you now have until your taxes are due for the year that you took the rollover, including extensions. So essentially October 15th of the year following when you do this rollover. So if you did a rollover in 2020 and you had a loan that you didn't pay back, then you have until October 15th of this year to actually pay back that money. So whatever the loan balance was, you'd want to get that paid back into your new retirement account or your new 401k plan so that it's not going to be taxable to you. If you don't pay it off, then it's subject to income tax. And if you're under 59.5, it's also possibly subject to 10% penalty. Next thing that you want to think about, number 3, is did you become separated from your former company between age 55 and 59.5? And that's with this current 401k plan. And if you did, you might be able to avoid paying a penalty for early distributions. Normally, if you take distributions from any retirement account, with one exception that I'll get to next, these distributions are not only subject to taxes, but a 10% premature distribution penalty. That's before 59.5. However, if you become separated from your employer between 55 and 59.5 and you have a retirement plan there, then the money in that plan can come out before 59.5 and not be subject to the 10% penalty. But if you're not aware of this and you just roll that money over either to your new 401k plan or to an IRA, then you're voiding the ability to avoid this 10% penalty. So you really want to be aware of that, especially if you're in between jobs and maybe you might need access to that money, then you want to hold off on rolling that over, or at least leave enough behind so that you could still get enough out of there and avoid the 10% penalty. Now, I said there is one exception. If you have a 457 plan, then with those plans, there is no 10% penalty. At any point, you can take the money out of the 457 plan and not pay the 10% penalty at any age. So that's also something to think about. If you happen to leave a job where you have a 457 plan, you also want to hold off on rolling that over until you're 59.5 so that you can access the money without any penalty. And the last thing you want to consider is, do you want to continue contributing to this account? And normally you can only contribute to one 401k plan at a time. So if you are no longer working at that company, then you can no longer make contributions. So your options would be that if your new employer, if you have a new employer, they offer a 401k plan, that you can contribute to that plan. You also, if you qualify, if your employer doesn't have a 401k plan or any retirement plan, then you could possibly make a contribution to a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA. Or if you are now self-employed or you have self-employed income, then you could make a contribution to a self-employed retirement plan. That could either be a 401k, a SEP plan, a simple. And if you're curious about these options, I would go back and listen to episode 24, which is retirement plan options for self-employed people. So I hope you found this episode helpful on the 4 things that you should think about anytime that you're considering a 401k rollover. And I have a couple checklists that I'll put in the show notes that kind of help you work through this process. One is just a general flowchart on should you do a rollover of a dormant 401k plan. And the second is a checklist that talks about handling net unrealized appreciation and how to deal with it, because I understand that can be rather complicated. So I hope you're enjoying these podcasts. And if you are, if you could leave me a review at Apple Podcasts, I'd really appreciate it. Just pull out your Apple phone and go to Apple Podcasts, leave me a 5-star review and also a few words about the podcast, things that you enjoy about it, things you've learned from it. And I'd really appreciate that. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I look forward to talking to you next Wednesday. Take care.
You should consult a financial advisor familiar with your specific circumstances before you make any financial decisions. Nothing in this broadcast constitutes a solicitation for the sale or purchase of any securities. Any mention of rates of return are historical or hypothetical in nature and are not a guarantee of future returns. Ryan Morrissey, CFP, is an investment advisor representative of Morrissey Wealth Management, LLC, a registered investment advisor.